My name is Leigh Jerrard. I had originally a background in construction, set building, and residential carpentry and things like that. That was many decades ago. I ultimately became an architect and did that for quite a while, but found it unfulfilling. And one day, about 12 or 13 years ago, I was working in my garden with my 3-year-old son. We had planted a bunch of fruit trees. We would water them with about 50 gallons of water, and then I would go back into the house and give them a bath because we got all muddy. And when I pulled the plug, I would watch 50 gallons of water go down the drain, which struck me as quite a waste considering I had just been irrigating these trees with drinking water. And then moments later, I was letting the same amount of water go down the drain to the sewage treatment plant. So I started playing around with simple, low-tech Greywater systems. I learned as much about it as I could. I printed up some flyers saying, it was aspirational, professional installation of residential Greywater irrigation systems. And lo and behold, we got a few phone calls, and the project of Greywater Core was born. Let's go to the next one. So right now we have a company, we've probably installed about 700 Greywater systems in Los Angeles County over the last 10 years. We're doing about 100 a year now. We have a crew. We send people out all over the place, and we are the boots on the ground. So everyone knows about Greywater or has heard about it, but most people don't actually know how to go about installing it or what these systems look like or how they can get one. So that's where we come in. So let's reflect on this photo for a minute. This is a very simple act that we all do every day, washing our hands. What is happening here, though, is that on the upstream side, water is traveling hundreds of miles across deserts and over mountains to get to your bathroom sink. It is pumped, filtered, purified, sterilized, and pressurized to get to your sink, and then it runs over our hands and immediately turns into sewage. At least that's what happens in the eyes of the state, where it becomes this sort of toxic waste that has to be disposed of as expediently as possible. It goes down the drain, and another sort of Byzantine network of pipes and pumps and forced settling chambers and oxygenation happens to this water. It's all incredibly energy intensive, and then it gets pumped out into the ocean, the Santa Monica Bay, where it does absolutely no good for anyone. So there's basically two problems. One is that we're importing water from distant sources to use to flush our toilets and water our plants and prepare food. And the other is that we're dumping tremendous amounts of wastewater into the ocean. Next slide, please. So this is one of the results of these sorts of things, although this is just sort of an ongoing crisis that we have in California. Next slide. And this is how it gets to our house. So even without a drought, water is an incredibly, has a very heavy carbon footprint. In the state of California, moving and treating water accounts for 19% of all electricity used in the state. So even without the ongoing collapse of civilization, it still makes sense to conserve water. Question?
Yeah, the California aqueduct is actually the single biggest energy user in California.
Yes, and Connor knows all about this. I'm glad he's not here because he always corrects me with these things. Next slide, please. So that brings us to Greywater, which is all wastewater generated in the home, except for toilets, which is obviously black water, and kitchen sinks are considered black water. It's typically about 50 to 80% of water used inside a residence. Greywater is untreated or minimally treated. In other words, it's generally just put out into the landscape. It stays on the site, and it goes, from inside your house to outside.
Right, what's black water? Is the stuff you can't use?
Black water is sewage. It is toilets and kitchen sinks due to fats, oils, and grease is not considered. Different states have different laws, but that's black water. Black water should go to the sewage treatment facility or septic system. And it's distinct, gray water is distinct from recycled water, which is the purple pipe water you'll see sometimes at colleges or golf courses will have signs saying this site uses recycled water. Recycled water comes from the sewage treatment facility. It starts out worse. It's raw sewage that is then filtered, sterilized, purified, and then pumped back to these large water-consuming outlets like a golf course. So it's a central source. Gray water is decentralized. Every house is producing gray water, and gray water can be used at every house, just in their lawn. If you think about a home, especially if you're building a home, since I used to be an architect, it's a thing that sits on the site. It takes an incredible amount of resources to build a house. You're mining metals and you're crushing concrete and you're making glass and cutting down trees to build the house. And then it sits there for the next 100 years, consuming more resources as we buy groceries and gas lines come in and electricity and water. And all of it generally, for most people, just goes out to landfills and to the atmosphere and to the ocean. A gray water system is one of the few things you can have on your landscape, on your lot, that will give back to the land. So a house with a gray water system is a generous house. Water goes out of the house and it creates shade trees and fruit trees and a cooling effect as you from evapotranspiration. So the best and easiest use of gray water is for irrigation. There are systems that you can reuse gray water, and it's now legal to use it for indoor non-potable uses, such as toilet flushing or laundry, but that's generally too complicated and expensive to do. And so what we do is use it for irrigation. Most homes typically use about half their water indoors for bathing, cooking, cleaning, and half outdoors for irrigation. So if you can connect those two together, you've saved about half of your water by reusing the indoor water a second time for irrigation. Next slide. Benefits of gray water are saves water, obviously, saves money that you would have spent on that water, reduces your carbon footprint because you're reducing the water conservation, the cost of the carbon footprint of all that water that would be pumped to your door. Reduces loads on sewage and septic systems. So gray water does protect the bay because right now all our wastewater is going out. There's phosphorus, there's nitrogen, there's a bunch of stuff like that in our wastewater. Currently, it's ending up in the ocean where it can actually create algae blooms and things like that because these are fertilizers. These are aspects of water such as phosphorus, nitrogen that are in water that plants will love, and so will algae in the ocean. So protecting the bay is a big benefit. Recharges the local groundwater by getting that water back into the land. Sustains a beautiful and bountiful garden. So fruit trees are my favorite thing for gray water. And it ensures water security for your landscape, especially if you have spent thousands or tens of thousands on beautiful plants, and then they start cutting water. Gray water can save your plants. Next slide. Some principles of gray water. There's a few things that you should know about how it works, and I'm going to concentrate mainly on really simple low-tech systems, which is our favorite. All gray water systems need to be able to have the ability to be turned off. So here's a simple laundry landscape system. There's a valve. Water comes up through the laundry discharge pipe, and it either goes into the sewer standpipe on the right or out to the garden on the left. So if you are doing loaded laundry with diapers or bleach or something that you don't want in your garden, you can simply turn it back to the sewer. Next. Irrigation must be subsurface. You're not allowed to spray untreated gray water. You should not see it puddling or pooling or running off. It has to be covered by 2 inches. So this is typically an underground emitter. It's a large diameter, but it's a few inches below grade, and the whole thing is covered with mulch, and there's a lid that goes on it, so you're not seeing or smelling gray water. Next, please. Use plenty of mulch. Wood chip mulch is God's gift to Greywater. Question?
For the underground, could you connect that directly to the OU system, or would the compost
To a what system?
the OU system?
You probably could. It might get, she's talking about Oyos, like underground pots that fill up with water and then distribute, sort of percolate out into the land. I wouldn't recommend it. You don't want Greywater to be standing for any length of time. I think that might be my next slide. No, I don't have it. But the other thing is you don't want to store Greywater in a tank. It is very rich in nutrients, which means it will grow bacteria, which in the case of a tank of water, it's anaerobic bacteria. And in other words, it'll turn septic and start getting kind of funky. So here's a crew. This is quite a few years ago, actually. We have, I think, 11 installers now. I'm going to cover 3 simple Greywater systems. The first one is a laundry to landscape. This is a system that we often, that homeowners can install themselves. It does not require a permit. It does not require an inspection. You can just do it, but you do have to follow the rules. It's a relatively handy person with $20 worth of tools can probably install this themselves. Greywater Core, my company, every few months will do a workshop. We just did one with Parker a couple months ago. It was really fun. Usually it's a homeowner workshop where we try to empower people to install their own Greywater systems. And it's usually a laundry to landscape because that's the thing that most homeowners can do, or even tenants if you're. I would also recommend just don't tell your landlord. Just go. She's right. It's some of the principles of this system are it's subsurface irrigation, it's these mulch basins, you have this valve that allows you to turn the system on or off. And all washing machines have this internal pump inside them that's what shoots water out the hose and back. We're harnessing the power of that pump to push water out into your landscape. So it's more or less a gravity flow system, but it's assisted by the laundry discharge pump. Let's look at what it actually looks like. The next slide. So again, here's the plumbing in the house. The 3-port valve, you can buy this stuff on Amazon. It's a 1-inch, at no point, so this is all 1-inch tubing. And then the emitters are all 1/2 inch. At no point is there anything smaller than 1/2 inch. So any laundry lint or impurities are just going to go through the system out into the wood chip mulch basins. Next slide, please. Here's the plumbing setup in the landscape. And these are the emitters. Around each emitter, there's going to be a large blanket of mulch. So do the next one, please. So this is the finished system. These are trenches. The mulch basins are really key to this. The mulch absorbs the Greywater. It fosters a microbial community that will break down impurities. It prevents evaporative loss, and it allows the Greywater to percolate out laterally through the landscape, so it spreads it out. So all of these systems that I'm talking about rely heavily on mulch, and that's usually the maintenance for these systems is over the course of a year, the wood chips will decompose, they'll break down into this very rich, dark compost. The trees will love it, but it won't absorb water as well. So it's just adding mulch. Sometimes we'll fluff up the mulch basins or redig them, but really none of these systems require any more maintenance than just adding wood chips. That's really all it is. And this is what the emitter looks like if you were to pop the lid off and look inside. It's a 1/2 inch full port outlet. You can adjust how much water comes out of each individual outlet. Often for a laundry landscape, there might be about 4 to 6 individual emitters. A family of 4 just doing laundry could support 4 to 6 fruit trees. Lemons do really well, avocados. We're really big on fruit trees. Natives can be a little tricky. My recommendation would be tear up your lawn, get Parker, talk to these guys who go to the theater paid, plant natives everywhere, which aren't going to need much irrigation once they get established. But then you've still got free water, usually about 30 gallons per person per day of a residence in a house, or maybe 25. So if you've got a family of 4, that's potentially 100 gallons of free water a day, which could support a community of stone fruits, citruses, avocados, passion fruits, all that stuff is going to thrive with Greywater. If you don't want fruit trees, riparian natives will do really well. So something like sycamores, you can't really overwater a sycamore. Riparian meaning that you'll find them naturally growing by the sides of rivers where they appreciate that extra water. And sycamores are really beautiful native and will promote local flora and fauna. Next, please. The second system, and this one does technically require a permit. The city of LA has now made it an over-the-counter permit, and homeowners can pull their own permits. You probably want a plumber to do the plumbing unless you're incredibly confident. But for a whole house system where you're starting to incorporate bathtubs, showers, and also laundry, you could do a branched drain system. And this is a gravity flow system. There's no pump, there's no storage, there's no filter. It's just redirects water out into the landscape, and then you can split one flow into 2, and 2 into 4, and 4 into 8, and spread the water out like a river delta. And each outlet emitter has a wood chip mulch basin, and you can, if you have the right topography, like ideally a gentle slope coming down from your house, it can be a really effective and beautiful way to spread the water out and get it to the plants that are going to love it. It obviously, being gravity flow, cannot go uphill, and it can't, and very steep slopes are also difficult, even a steep downhill slope, because we might have erosion. It's a little harder to control. All these systems this system requires some plumbing work. So the ideal scenario would be a single-story home with a crawl space, so you have access to the drain pipes below the house. Second-story bathrooms can be tricky, and houses that are built on a slab are also can be impossible to access the plumbing to redirect it. When they build most houses, they combine all the pipes together, and there's a single pipe coming out from under the slab that is combined Greywater and Blackwater, which does us no good. Nowadays, the city of LA and I think Santa Monica requires new construction to be dual plumbed in preparation for Greywater. So instead of one pipe coming out of the house that's combined everything, there's 2 drain pipes. One is Blackwater, which is toilets and kitchen sinks. The other is Greywater, which is bathtubs, showers, bathroom sinks, and laundry. That makes it really easy for a Greywater installer to come in, get that water, and then figure out ways to get it out into the landscape. The other thing about these simple systems is there's no makeup water. There's no, so generally they're not connected to any type of normal irrigation system. If you are out of town, there won't be any Greywater, and if you have house guests, there will be extra Greywater. So when we design these systems, we usually plan accordingly. Sometimes it's an overlay on an existing irrigation system where we would target the high water needs plants, the fruit trees, some of the shade trees, and things like that. So that's the sort of schematic diagram. Next slide. Here we are. We have installed a diverter valve. Let me see if I can get a laser on this. Okay. So originally, all these fixtures. This is a bathroom. So there's a bathroom sink, a shower, and probably one for vent. We're all going down to this cast iron pipe and out to the sewer. We installed a diverter valve that sends water out to the garden, and a check valve this is a one-way valve called a backwater valve that does not allow sewage to get back up into the Greywater system. Next slide, please. This is a flow splitter. So this is the first split. Water is coming out of the house by gravity. It just flows like a little trickle down these pipes, and we split it in 2. So one flow goes into 2, and next slide, please, and 2 into 4. And here we are spreading out the water over this landscape. This particular job had a long linear mulch basin. It's on the top of this hill, so we're irrigating these pine trees below. But there's different ways to do it. Next slide, please. Here's a newly planted, I think this might be a cherry tree, someone could correct me on that. This is a semicircular mulch basin. This will be filled in with wood chips eventually. Next slide, please. And this is what it looks like when water is going into the land. Question?
So with that little thing, that. So we've got like a whole row of them. Is there something in there that makes sure that the water goes all the way to the ground and not just the first tree, or?
If you go back one or two, one more, this one. So each flow splitter is a 50-50 split. Even if one side is lower than the other, when it hits the flow splitter, that's perfectly level. Go back one more. You can see my assistant Bula is carefully leveling the flow splitter to get an even distribution. So water comes out and you get half and half, and then you split it again and you get quarter and a quarter and a quarter and a quarter, and then you can break it down further. But there's a little bit of math, there's some geometry. Sometimes we'll do tricky things like recombine one into the other. When you set it up, you do it in such a way that you get as even distribution as possible throughout each emitter.
So.
Go forward a few more. Okay. And finally, this brings us to pump systems. I know some people in the audience have this particular system. This is probably the most commonly installed system that we do. I love them. It's a whole house Greywater system. There is a pump involved, but it's also very low-tech system in that there's no storage, there's no filtration. The pump allows you to send water to where you need it to be. And often the area to be irrigated is uphill from the house or from the pump basin. So that'll help you spread the water out in the landscape. This house, we went in first and dual plumbed the house. So our plumbing crew came in, we separated the bathtubs, laundry, and shower from the sewer line, which is the big one, and plumbed them into a second stub out, which is Greywater. So this is, again, this is toilets and kitchen sinks. This is bathtubs, showers, bathroom sinks, and laundry. Here's the diverter valve that allows you to send water back to the sewer if you don't want to irrigate with Greywater, or if you need to turn your system off for any reason. Most of the time it goes into this pump basin. There is a submersible pump with a float switch. As soon as the water rises in this basin, the pump turns on and shoots water out. It's hard to see in this picture, but it goes out there. There is an overflow off this basin back to the sewer, so if the power is out, this water will just safely return back to the sewer. Here's a backwater valve that prevents water from backing up into the pump basin. Next slide, please. This is what it looks like inside. It looks complicated, but it's actually pretty basic. If anyone's seen how a sump pump works, it's basically the same thing. Water goes into the tank, the float switch rises, turns on the pump, and shoots all the water out. This one has a remote valve actuator, so we can turn the Greywater system on or off from a convenient location inside the house, instead of having to go into your crawl space and turn on left. Next slide, please. And then it just goes to these emitter outlets spread around the landscape. And each one, they're all the same ones, basically the same thing we have for the laundry landscape system. Each one has a little valve that allows you to turn it off or to adjust how much water comes out of each one. And you can get up to about 16 maximum, or if you do two zones, maybe about 28 or 30 individual outlets spread around the landscape. So you can really cover a lot of the landscape with it. You know, often houses have this perimeter planting, where you can do all the border, the larger plants. This type of system where you've got mulch basins does not really work for ground cover. That's one of the drawbacks of this. It's best for fruit trees, shade trees, larger ornamentals, where the root systems are big enough that they can find the Greywater, because there are point sources of Greywater rather than spreading it over an entire landscape like drip line or sprinklers. Next slide, please. And that's kind of my final thought. The tree's final thought is that most of us in Los Angeles are watering our plants with drinking water. It's not exactly like the Avion commercial, but it's pretty close to it. It's the highest quality water you can get. The same water that comes out of your kitchen sink is what comes out of your garden hose bib too. So the trees do not need drinking water. They are perfectly fine with gently used water from inside the house. So any questions real quick? Or are we gonna go panel with it? Yeah.
How long can you keep rainwater?
So My company, I concentrated on greywater. Rainwater is a totally different thing. It's often incompatible with greywater because greywater you don't want to store in a tank. Rainwater harvesting systems, you kind of have to store in a tank. You catch as much as you can. I prefer really big systems like 500 to 5,000 gallons, which will really make a dent. But even these smaller tanks, all that stuff is good. And especially if you have native gardens, rainwater. We got a call from someone who had a 400-gallon system recently. There was an email who basically kept his entire native garden alive off 400 gallons, which is amazing to me. But because I've been to some houses where they use 400 gallons a day on their lawns. I've seen a lot worse than that.
Not in a native garden, I hope.
What's that?
Not in a native garden.
Oh, not in a native garden. No, these are like acres of grass and this kind of stuff up in the hills. But to answer your question, rainwater, it's usually sort of coarsely screened going in to the tank. It's kept in total blackness, so we want really dark, light-proof tanks, and then it can stay indefinitely. It'll basically just sit in the tank quietly, ready for use for months or years. So, yeah.
Why does it have to be in the dark? Because it evaporates, or what happens if it has any light source?
In the dark, light will create algae growth. It's not the end of the world, but your water will turn green and get kind of like, green.
Well, what do you recommend to cure that water?
If you have green rainwater, it's not the end of the world. It'll clog, the algae will clog emitter, like drip line emitters, but it's safe. If you don't want to spray untreated rainwater through sprinklers because it could contain pathogens. If there's bird poop or dead mouse on your roof, rainwater runs over it. It could pick up things like that. And then, so anytime we are spraying rainwater, we do a more elaborate filtration and UV sterilization. But for a garden hose or something, often you don't need to really treat it as long as you're not drinking it or inhaling the droplets.
But if you happen to store water and it does happen that you have it in the sun, now you have that, can you put it in the garden, or you have to?
Oh, it's totally fine to put it in the garden.
Oh.
Yeah, it just gets kind of funky. It'll clog, certain types of
smells
emitters.
bad.
And but you can use a water hose or whatever to.
Yeah, you don't have to bucket. I mean, don't drink it.
No, of course not. No,
But it's fine. I mean, I think even the bad smelling water is probably full of micronutrients, and your plants will appreciate them. Okay, well, thank you. This has been really great. I appreciate all these. I appreciate just spreading the word, and I want to talk to some of you guys soon.
So thank you so much, Leigh. That was great. Thank you.